Still examining crop circle stuff when he died. He died last year, September 28th. But at this point in time, he noticed that some of the plants were at a later stage of development. And they had seeds already. And he noticed that here up top, these are seeds from a crop circle, from plants that have been deeply affected by crop circles. And then here were the controls, and he took one look at those crop circle seeds up there and said, those are worthless. And yet, being a good scientist, he decided, well, just to prove that they're worthless, let me put them in germination chamber, or in germination paper, and put them in the germination chamber, and, and we'll give them the 5 to 6 days or a week that takes for things to germinate. And what he discovered was that the crop circle seeds, which you see down here, germinated in half the time and grew twice as fast. They didn't even look viable when he put them in the paper. And here were the regular control seeds. And Leffie was famous in the seed research business among seedsmen and farmers for something called development factor. It was, you take the number of seeds that actually germinated, and your seed lot is always 30 seeds. You always would use 30 seeds. And so you would count the number of seeds that germinated, and then you would have to measure each one of these sprouts, how long they were, and then you'd add them all together and you would get the average height, and then you would multiply the average height times the number germinated, and you would get a number, and that number was your development factor. And so when a seed lot, when farmers wanted to buy really good seeds, they would always say, what's the development factor here? Because plants or seeds, seeds that won't germinate are worthless. So what he discovered was that the crop circle seeds had this phenomenal development factor. And in science, it's nice to have something that's called significant, and those of you that are in science know what significant means. It generally means that something is wildly more productive or wildly less productive, etc. And we used in the lab 38% as our rule of thumb. Sometimes 19% is acceptable in science, but we use 30% because we started to be spoiled by how incredibly powerful these seeds were. So, once it was discovered that the crop circles were producing these phenomenal seeds, then it just added to the whole mystery of what was happening. And he was under pressure to explain what was going on, and he resisted that again and again and again. No, we don't have enough data yet. We don't have. And he said to me at one point, if you do your research well and you do it correctly, the answer is going to fall right in your lap. You can't make it up. You can't be premature. You can't, be thinking. You can't be hoping that it's this or that because that skews your perception. He said, no. You just sit with it. It will tell you its truth. So then into the lab one day comes this molten iron ore. Actually, it was a bunch of leaves that had this reddish-brown stuff on it. And he's looking at these leaves and thinking, what is this crud on the leaf? And after looking at the samples and turning them every which way, he decided, well, I wonder if I could peel that leaf off of that brown crud. And so he succeeded in doing so, and when he did, what he discovered was there were all the leaf fibers molded right into the bottom of the brown crud. So at that point he said, this, whatever this is, was molten when it hit that plant. And so he did a few tests and discovered that it was in fact iron ore. and iron ore has to be 1200 degrees centigrade to be molten. So then he was like, this is getting crazier by the moment. We now have bent nodes and exploded, cavities, and one row of cells that can expand and then gets somehow fried open or whatever. And now we have molten iron ore floating around in a field at night all by itself, 1200 degrees. How does this picture fit together? So at that point, he said if it was really molten and it hit that plant at 1200 degrees, that plant should have exploded. The steam, the liquid in there would have exploded. And once it exploded, it would have forced its way up through that iron ore, so it gets it back out, he puts it under the microscope, and sure enough, he finds that there's a steam vent, a whole bunch of little steam vents in this iron ore. And so he said, it was molten, it was iron ore, the plant was deeply affected, and I don't know why. I don't know what's going on still. So other things began to come into the lab. There's just a couple of other effects here. One of the things he discovered was that in any field where there's going to be a crop circle, whatever stage of development the plants are at, that is the stage that's going to be affected the most deeply by the crop circle. And what he realized, it was in this case here's an apical node, this is the top node on a plant, and it's all curled up and shriveled up. And at that point, we were realizing that the plant itself is made of cellulose. How many of you remember the days when plastic was called cellulose? So, when I was a girl, we didn't have plastic cones, we had cellulose cones. That was, plants are made of cellulose, and cellulose is very, very plastic. So, what he was beginning to see the pattern of now was that always whatever stage of stage of development the plant was at, that was the stage that would be the most disturbed, and only that stage would be disturbed. The plant would then continue on just as normally as ever. And so he began to realize that that there was this energy that had the capacity to curl this up, and so there had to be heat involved. When you put bent nodes and steam expulsion cavities and iron ore all in a pile, he said there's heat involved. One way or another, there's got to be heat involved. And then this was another example. We saw a lot of this. This stuff here, I don't know if you can see that that's purple. Those are anthocyanins. It's the same coloration that makes a plum purple. And it's loaded with proanthocyanidins, which are a nutritious factor and also a heavy, heavy-duty antioxidant. And what he realized was that this plant had been injured and that it had produced tons of anthocyanins as antioxidants to help heal itself. Just like we take, those same antioxidants to help ourselves. And so at this point, he began to get other kinds of people approaching him. Linda Moulton Howe and Lefty and I became very good friends. And Linda was investigating all these animal mutilations. We hadn't come to any kind of conclusions around crop circles. And now Linda is bringing in all these animal mutilation things. And this was an area on the stomach of a cow. And I included this because this is a very good example of what happens in an animal mutilation. And you could read in the reports all sorts of reports that say, oh, coyotes did it. Well, you know, you can look at that and say, I don't think so. No coyote is going to do such a nice, neat job. And, you know, and the other thing in animal mutilations was that the animals had no blood in them when finished. None. And so the question was, where did all the blood go? And how did they get the blood out of that animal? Lefty was just absolutely, he refused to work on the animal mutilation stuff himself. He loved animals. He was a vegetarian all his life, wouldn't eat meat. He said, I will look at the plants around that animal, I will look at the soil, I will look at the trees, I will, you know, test everything, but I don't send me samples of an animal. I don't want to work with them. So, you know, so there were a couple of other people that I talked with that were, you know, that were really amazed at the kinds of effects that happened with animal mutilations, which you can read in my book. I wrote about this in Consciousness and Energy, Volume 2. But this is a very good example of what, you know, what happens. Sometimes the udder would be missing. Sometimes all the testicles on a bull would be missing. The whole anal area would be cored out and all of that mucous membrane gone. Mucous membrane around the jaw, gone. And sometimes the ears and the tail were also gone. But here was an example of a cow that had an ear missing. And you can't see it very well on here. I've got one more slide. But the hair right along the spine of this cow could be pulled right out. You just tug on it and it came right out by the handful. And we were just amazed. It's like, okay, you can see the hair has also turned almost a gray color. And this particular cow, we did get samples of this, and I don't think I have photos in this one, but we got, there were these brownish red, almost looked like bakelite, brownish black, reddish black, looked like bakelite stuck to the hide, and got that into the lab, and it was absolutely pure hemoglobin. So we were, at that point, it's like, oh my gosh. The hemoglobin, I'll just say another little thing about the hemoglobin. I don't know if any of you know what it takes to get pure hemoglobin, but it's a long process. It has to happen in the lab. There are several stages. You know, you spin it and you lysolyze it and you do all kinds of stuff. And so, you know, the question that we had was who and how or what is, you know, taking all the blood out of cows and purifying it in the process when we can barely do that in a lab. At this point, Levengood was saying privately to me, there are other beings who really know how to use energy. And they have a hand in this kind of thing. And he would never say that publicly, but what he discovered was that in any plant, any soil, any tree, any leaf, any animal, any human being who had been exposed to these very unusual energies, there would be a change in the redox of that plant, of that soil. And so let me use grass as an example. We often got grass samples. And redox is a measure of how many transactions per minute are happening in that grass. And they would be thousands and thousands more transactions per minute as that grass attempted to heal itself from being exposed to some tremendous kind of energy. And so this is an example right here of the soil around the rear end of the cow and the increase in redox in that soil. So we knew that, or in that grass, so we knew that somehow a tremendous energy force or source of some kind had been, utilized around that cow. So we still didn't have any answers at this point. And about this time, we started to get all kinds of stuff from UFO landing sites. And I don't have a lot of pictures of those, but I have some of the more interesting ones. And this actually came from Snowflake, Arizona, and the Walton case. I don't know if you've read that book. Travis Walton was picked up. He was part of I think it was a wood crew, woodcutters crew or something like that. And they were leaving the mountain, going back home one night after work, and they saw this huge silver craft in the trees. So they drove over to it, and Travis, being Travis, gets out of the truck and runs over. He's going to go over and investigate this silver ball. He gets, I forget, 3-4 feet away from it, and the power of the energy coming off of that thing just knocked him out cold. And there was a flash, and the other 5 guys in the truck said, "Whoa, that thing just shot him." So they took off and left him. So they get back to town, and once they're back to town and they're starting to get out of their panic mode, they said, "Whoa, we should go back and get Travis." So they go back and Travis is gone. And so is the silver craft. So at that point, they go back into town and they tell their wives, "Well, Travis, we saw this silver thing, blah, blah, blah." So first thing you know, the police are accusing these 5 guys of killing Travis and disposing of the body. And there's this whole investigation that is going on. Nobody can find Travis. Well, Travis had been picked up by this craft. And he came to on board. And he crawled out of this morgue-like thing with no clothes on, and goes down the hall to the office or whatever, the control room of the UFO, and says, "Take me home. I want to go home." And proceeded to give them a hard time until they finally did. They dropped him off outside of town 3 or 4 days later, stark naked in the middle of the night. He was freezing to death. He was absolutely traumatized. He laughs about it now, but it wasn't so funny at the time that it happened. And so years go by, and the couple of the guys, one of the woodcutters, happens to know somebody who knows Dr. Levengood, and he said, "I wonder if there might be some unusual energies in that location where that craft landed." So they go back and they mark the spot where the craft had landed, and then they go out in concentric rings taking tree samples for I forget how many feet. And these are the results. You can see this and this and this one here and this. So I think this is like 1, 10, and 2A. The rings are gigantic. Those trees have grown unbelievably, unexplainably fast. Here's the usual ring spacing over here and here. And they're so close, they're hard to count. And then you get these gigantic ring spacings. And what we realized in the lab was that, wow, those trees had somehow not only survived the energy that had impacted them, they had utilized that energy to increase, and I forget what the percentage of increase was. It seemed like it was 800%. An increase in annual growth in those trees, and kept it up for 25 years. So, at that point, we were like, okay, so there's an energy out there that is very, very powerful. And once exposed to it, it leaves its fingerprint on you. So that became pretty critical later on. So then, this is another situation. There was a young man in Brazil, near Brazil, and